Hello, I'm Rob Walker.
And I'm Emily Eccles.
And this is the Civil Service Pensions Podcast.
We work for civil service pensions. We're communicators and we're passionate about making the complicated seem straightforward.
But we don't know everything there is to know about pensions.
We're back for a second season to learn alongside you. In every episode, we go back to basics to help you get to grips with your civil service pension and make more informed choices about your financial future.
Every week, we'll be chatting to expert guests and members of the scheme to find out how you can get the most out of your pension and why it's one of the best in the UK public sector. Today, we're talking about the idea of work being a defining feature of our identity. It's often the first question we ask when we meet someone new. So, what do you do? And it can inform a lot of the snap judgments that we make about someone consciously or unconsciously. Are we defined by our jobs? And how can we make sure we're not all heading for an identity crisis when we leave work behind for good?
Such an interesting topic to discuss today. And with us is Scilla Christmas, Valuation and Strategic Review Manager and co-chair of the Civil Service Carers Network from the Cabinet Office. Welcome back. So it's great to see you again. And thanks so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for asking me. It's lovely to experience my second recording for podcast.
I know.
Because I did series 1 too.
So, Scilla, for those who didn't manage to listen to your episode from our first season, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role in the Cabinet Office?
OK, so I'm Policy Lead for Civil Service Pensions and co-chair of the Civil Service Carers Network. I'm generally known for loving my job, which is why I think you invited me, Rob, because I'm a bit of a pensions geek. I love talking pensions. And when you get me started, I struggle to stop.
Well, that's why we've got you on one of our full-length episodes, Scilla.
Takes one to know one.
So the title of today's episode is We Are What We Do. What exactly do we mean by that?
Well, I think it's very interesting. So the first thing you do when you talk to somebody is talk about the weather, don't you? After that, you probably go, and what do you do? Because it's something that connects us. We all think if we're working age adults, we're going to be working in something. Or, we might be lucky to have retired, in which case it's probably, and what were you doing when you were working? So we always think about, work is such a fundamental part of our lives, takes up so many hours through 40 years of life. And we tend to associate certain characteristics with jobs. So, part of it came about because there's actually, historically, surnames were associated with jobs. So you'd have a smith who could be a blacksmith, a locksmith or a silversmith. A miller might be a baker or somebody working actually in a mill, blending flours. My own name actually may relate, there's some debate on it, to those who planned Christmas festivities in the Middle Ages.
Wow.
So Christmas might have derived from that.
Wow.
Or it could be Norman for Noel, but there we go. But as a society, we also have or derive people's worth from their job. So therefore, we derive our worth from our job.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good point. And as you say, it's a good conversation starter on top of that. But I guess it's almost like a bit of unconscious bias maybe that sneaks in. So sometimes it's a good thing, maybe sometimes it's a bad thing. I think, talking a bit more about the history of it, there was a really interesting article on BBC Work Life about all of this, and it talks about how historically we didn't tend to choose our jobs, like you were just saying, Scilla. It was usually generational. If your father was a farmer, you'd also become a farmer, or you just take whatever was available. But over the past century, we've had increased access to education, and that's led to, more varied occupations appearing with more levels of income. So your job is still a significant marker of your identity, but perhaps in a more nuanced way than ever before. When someone says that they're a surgeon, you kind of automatically assume that they've had a really strong education and they're probably quite a high earner. And those two factors are like metrics that, for centuries, they dictated somebody's standing in society. Even today, they can really affect how you judge that person, consciously or unconsciously. So, as I say, there's an element of unconscious bias that might come into it, maybe.
Yes, the behavioural scientists call it heuristic shortcuts. In order to be able to process in order to make the decisions we have to do every day, the brain sets up shortcuts. So it's a kind of, you mentioned surgeons. Well, the equivalent nowadays, I think, in Britain is NHS, post-pandemic, doctor, nurse, saint.
Yes.
You know, you build up these shortcuts because of your experiences and, you know, what you've picked up from culture and society. So it's a way of dealing with the world and managing it, but it has its negative sides. Because you might judge on a first impression, like an accent, or you might judge on an appearance. And, you know, that can devalue people as well as value people.
Absolutely.
So it is a two-way street. And I think sometimes people get very tied up with it. And I think if you lose that status, or don't have that meaning that in your life that your job imbues, it can cut you loose. It can undermine your mental health. And, you know, particularly if you blur your work and life, and it sort of enmeshes and it spreads. So work isn't a distinct factor. It's just, you know, spreads its tentacles throughout your life. That really does start causing problems. It's a very interesting one. I mean, I have to say I would probably be one of those where work spreads.
Yeah. Well, I suppose we've all just lived through the global pandemic, which has, in many instances, changed our kind of relationship with work. What impact do you think that's had on sort of work-life balance and how work is part of our identity?
I think one of the biggest changes for us is that actually a lot of us are working from home. And many of us worked through the pandemic at home, if we were lucky enough to do that. And now we're working at least part of the week at home. So there isn't that cut-off of, right, I've left my house, got out of the door, got on the train, done my commute. That's the start of my job. That's when I start gearing up. You don't gear up, you just switch. And I think then it's very hard to cut down and to separate. And the study by King's College London last year showed that actually, yes, people who had a daily commute often use some of that time back to exercise during pandemic, to eat healthily, to sleep better. But lines were blurred and it didn't compromise well-being. And particularly when people had problems switching off. And I think there's some studies that show that when you react to stress, your stress hormones go up, your blood pressure goes up. But then when that stress goes, you fall back to a natural state, which is healthy for you. If that stress doesn't leave, if you can't switch off, then you reset your natural state, and that can cause long-term problems for your heart, etc. So it's very important that you find a way to switch off from work.
I was going to say, like, I work from home, and I suppose we both do, don't we, Emily? And I can totally relate to what you're saying there around the boundaries being blurred. You know, there's the amount of times where you sort of like roll out of bed and just chuck some clothes on and just sit down in front of the computer, you know, to sort of start work.
Yeah.
That commute time, whilst I don't miss that, it does give you that time, doesn't it, to just kind of get yourself in the headspace for work.
Yeah, and it gives you that boundary between home life and work life. Like, I can really relate to that as well. I remember I was working from home, I think, for about a year before the pandemic started. And then my whole team started working from home, obviously, in 2020. And it felt like we were working harder than we'd ever worked before, because that kind of invisible boundary had completely disappeared.
I mean, the opposite, of course, was that work was taken away because it wasn't there and people were furloughed. So we weren't working at all for a period. I mean, Rob, I think you experienced this. Are you willing to share your story?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was furloughed. I mean, it was in a different life, different role. But yeah, I was furloughed for a few months, and it was... Well, at first I was kind of like quite happy about being furloughed because I was like, well, I was getting paid and I was off, you know. In fact, I remember a neighbour saying to me, who was also furloughed, you know, it's like being retired. Socially distanced over the fence, of course. But I definitely experienced an identity crisis. You know, within the first couple of weeks, I felt like, well, hang on a minute. If I've not got work to go to do, to fixate on, to think about, then... what's the point in me, kind of thing. But, you know, obviously I'm a dad, you know, I'm a husband, and those things are really important to me. But I hadn't actually realised until work was taken out of my life how important it was to me. And I think, I'm sure a lot of other people have, you know, post-pandemic. It's really caused me to sort of consciously reevaluate my relationship with work and how I sort of feel about work. So, work's important to me, and it's important to me that I do a good job and I feel like I'm being rewarded, and, in terms of the type of work that I'm doing, as well as obviously financially. But nothing's ever going to be more important than my family and my life outside of work, and actually work is a means to that end, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah, I think the pandemic, created a lot of disruption for all of us. Work changed, social lives changed because we couldn't mix or had to mix differently.
Yeah.
For carers, just talking about my network role, an awful lot of people took on caring responsibilities they didn't have before because services were disrupted. And even now, some of those services haven't returned to normal. So caring has become a bigger part of a lot of people's lives. And that definitely pulls on the family relationship rather than the work relationship. So I think, any shift, any big experience that reminds us that life is so short. And in essence, in the pandemic, those lockdowns were about protecting life, but we still lost a tremendous number of lives. It does then challenge you to think that life is transient, and then maybe you need to rethink. So a lot of people, I think, like you, Rob, have rethought how they do things. Others have fallen back to old patterns or been forced into new ones because with the carers, the services aren't necessarily returned, or we've got new sufferers with long COVID. So it's a different world. Is it automatically that everyone's now got a balanced home life? I don't think so.
No, because you've got to make that happen for yourself, haven't you? You've got to give yourself a balanced life. I mean, for me personally, both myself and my wife work from home. And, now I see the fact that the company I work for enables me to do that as a benefit to working there. And one that, frankly, I don't think I could do without anymore because of the balance that I'm lucky enough to have been able to find in that.
So I think this is such an interesting conversation, but we are a pensions podcast. We talk about pensions and we talk about retirement. How does all of this relate to retirement?
This is one that's interesting because I think society thinks it's retirement, you're going to retire and just enter into these golden uplands, wonderful retirement where everything's lovely, you've got lots of money, you're going to go and travel and enjoy life and socialise. And a lot of people feel pressure to fit that norm. I mean, that's another behavioural science piece, the piece about social norms. The more you connect to a group, the more you feel that you should feel out of step if you're not behaving in the same way. And I think that's a bit of a myth. And I think we need to think about, ultimately, everybody needs to find a route for themselves. And it's very important that you do what suits you. But we also need to remember that your views and experiences will change through life. I think we always think we'll think the same. We'll always be committed to work, or we'll always be absolutely fixated as a Rolling Stones fan. But it's not necessarily true. Our views do change. And I always quote this one about retirement. When I started working for the civil service, for years, the first civil service lives I went to, or through the years, you just get a string of 50-year-olds, or 50, 51, 52, hitting the store going, I'm starting to feel it now. When can I retire? And there's just sort of trigger points almost, whether it's the working hours, in your physical, how you feel the tiredness, or whether your life changes. So things will change. I think it's important to not stress that you don't know what you want in retirement. And actually, if you want to work until, say, you're 75, work until you're 75, but make it be a conscious decision. Don't just fall into it. I think, leaving work can be frightening, but it can be a change of direction. You can take your work skills and go and be a trustee of a charity, do governance work in the third space where you can afford to do it now. You could still work, you might just do it in a different way and get value in a different way, or you might find a new purpose, a new hobby, take time to care for your family. So, we don't deal well with uncertainty. We like certainty, and not knowing what we're facing isn't going to help our health. So if you think through what you like now, what you might like in the future, what you might be facing, and just try and keep it as flexible as possible and see it as a world of opportunities rather than something to be frightened of.
Yeah.
Or like you say, like a pressure to conform or to do a certain thing that you're supposed to do when you retire, like take up golf or go on cruises. You know, you don't have to do that. They're all very stereotypical kind of tropes that we associate with retirement, aren't they? I guess one thing I've said to, people who are staring down the barrel of a 30-year career and thinking, well, why should I even think about retirement? I'm not going to know what I want to do in 30 years as well. You don't need to know what you want to do. You just need to know how do you want to feel when you retire.
Yeah.
You want to feel comfortable. You want to feel like you can enjoy some of the same luxuries that you work really hard to enjoy now. And, would you not want to feel the same in retirement? Doesn't matter what you do with that time and with those luxuries, but if that's how you want to feel, then that informs how you plan for your retirement. And I guess that whole identity crisis and that whole, okay, I've left my job. What am I now? How can you avoid that identity crisis when you retire, Sulla?
I think this goes back to don't put yourself in a straitjacket of saying, right, I'm going to retire. That means I give up work and I just be.
Yeah.
I hear a lot of public servants and civil servants particularly. So our members say, I like my work because I am helping people. So, can you find another way to help people? Think outside the box. But if you look into the retirement space, and this piece about staying flexible comes in, there's various ways you can do so. You can partially retire. So if you want to test retirement, ease back, do a few days work a week and have a few days extra to rest, recuperate, see family, volunteer. You can reduce your pay or reduce your working hours, and then you can take your pension and your lump sum to work alongside your working hours and your salary.
Just like 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out
Foot
the door.
out, yes. Yeah. You could always plan to leave work and take a lower graded job as well, but leave your pension untouched until you want it. There's all sorts of flexibility around when you take your pension, when you stop work, and what you do with your time. So the pension ultimately is there to secure your financial future. It doesn't dictate what you do with your time. So, yeah, but I mean, think now, you might be 30.
Slightly older, but yeah.
Speak for yourself.
Well, you can't retire yet, I know. But, again, coming back to Civil Service Live, I love going on the stores because I love talking to the members. And you get lots of young people come along and go, oh, the pension's not important to me. I'm going to work until I drop. Or because I'm not going to get a pension until I'm 70 or something. I'll just work until I drop. Okay, what if you drop at 35? What happens? Well, the pension is there for you on ill health retirement. But just don't be afraid of that magic land that is the future, that is old age, that is the uncertainty. The pension is a very strong financial building block for everything you do now, as well as in retirement. You've got death in service life cover that helps, may pay off your mortgage for your kids when you die. You've got ill health cover so that if you do face a bad car accident that keeps you out of work or your current job, it could go into payment. And then you've got, and yes, I know I've got a strong pension behind me that will kick in when I need it in retirement. So that helps me make other financial decisions about where I can save and where I can spend. So the pension is one of these building blocks of life. So if you look at the pension as your cornerstone for all of the next phases of your life, whilst you work for the civil service and beyond, and then you can think about the freedom that gives you to do what you want. Before the pandemic, we were always hearing about people having portfolio careers. They might work part-time in communications and engagement and part-time on a website, and by the side have a craft business and create this portfolio. You can move on to do that. Don't let fear block the concept. But get to know your pension, get to know what it does for you, and think about you now, what you might want now, but also what you might want later. So, don't close yourself in to a set, fixed future, because everything changes in a blink of an eye.
I think what you were saying about partial retirement as an option, I know people, like my mum, for instance, would really relate to that. So she worked in the NHS for about 50 years over 50 years actually, by the time that she fully retired. And she partially retired 10 years before she took full retirement, because at that point, She felt like she wasn't finished. She had a lot more to give. She was a nurse in the community, a specialist palliative care nurse. So she really took a lot of kind of value from her job and could really see the difference that she was making. And then 9 or 10 years later, when she did come to fully retire, by that point she was ready. And she was, you know, I remember her saying to me, like, this is the right time. And I know it's the right time. So I think that's a really good point about
It's
partial
ironic, isn't
retirement.
it? Because you spend, you know, all week waiting for the weekend, or all year waiting to go on holiday, to be away from work, and then it gets towards the end of your career and you want to hang on.
Yeah.
But the reason that holidays are so precious and weekends so precious is because they are rare.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you do something special with them, or try to do something special, and you look forward to it. If you have this endless expanse of time ahead of you with nothing that enthuses you, gets you up in the morning, then, you know, it starts feeling like an endless wasteland.
It's intimidating.
Yeah. The thing you need to think about is what's going to get you up in the morning.
Yeah.
And that might be your garden, that might be exercise and competing in a triathlon. There's a whole range of things.
It's funny because in our first series, we spoke to a lady called Linda who was retired, and she talked about how, you know, it's not just the time that you spend kind of in work, doing work, but a lot of your emotional energy outside of work kind of goes into thinking about and worrying about and fixating about and coming up with ideas about work, you know, so it's really permeates your life, even when you're not, you know, in front of your desk.
Yeah.
Linda's episode is episode 2, so do go back and listen to that to hear Linda's story in full.
Well, even your evenings, you know, once you're home from work and you've done your chores and had your tea, you know, you go to bed early to be ready to get up early. So it does circumscribe the rest of your life. You know, when I go out with the girls for dinner in the week, it's like, okay, it's a school night, we need to go home now.
Yeah. It kind of leaches into your other decision making.
Come on, girls, it's 2 a.m. I've got work tomorrow.
Come on.
No, it's normally
Let's be
9
sensible.
when I'm calling it.
Let's be sensible.
We do have the University of Third Age.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people in retirement have picked it up. So that's all sorts of courses of interest, whether academic or otherwise. Well worth looking it up if you or even your parents at this stage in life are looking to do some more learning.
Great. We can put a link to that in the show description as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So where can members find out a bit more about their options when it does come to retirement?
Well, as always, there's plenty of information on the scheme website. Head to civilservicepensionscheme.org.uk and select Planning for Retirement. And there's lots of helpful stuff in there. So no matter how far or near you are, it's there for you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Sarah. I feel like I've learned a lot. It's been a life-enhancing, to use Linda's words, conversation.
It really has. It really has. Thanks, Scylla. Thanks for being with us today.
It's lovely. It's lovely to talk to you. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
As always, to find out more about anything that we've talked about today, or to tell us something that you want us to cover in a future episode, you can head to civilservicepensionscheme.org.uk/podcast.
Make sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And you can also leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode was recorded in July 2023, and everything that we've talked about is accurate at the time of recording. Thanks for joining us.